Hello and welcome to another Monday night Q&A. I'm joined tonight by my colleague Keith Moss, one of our area engineers from the assessment team. Good evening, Keith.
Good evening, Sam. How are you doing?
I'm good. How's your Monday been so far?
Yeah, not too bad. I've been up in Lincoln today, which is a bit further north than where I normally go. I'm an Essex boy. And it was very snowy up there, but I was doing a hazardous area engineer assessment today at a gas compressor site, so something a little bit different. Very good.
Yeah. It's. I think it's something that not all of our contractors are involved with, and perhaps not all of our contractors know that we do. But yeah, we do have a hazardous area scheme which runs throughout the UK, and yeah, it's something that we've spoke about. Perhaps we'll introduce in a wire webinar maybe next year.
Yeah.
Okay, well, as with all of our live Q&A sessions, I'll just run through a few house rules. So we'll start off with our question of the week, which we posted out across social media channels earlier today. We'll go through our answers to that question, and then while you're putting questions into the chat, we'll go through some of the questions we didn't get around to from previous Q&A sessions. So please put your questions into the chat, remembering there's no such thing as a stupid question, only stupid answers. And please remember to be respectful to each other in the chat, because the whole idea of this evening is that we're trying to improve our collective knowledge and understanding of all things associated with BS 7671 and the world of electrical installations. So yeah, please be respectful and mindful of others within the chat. Okay, let's just have a look at what our question of the week was and remind people. So question of the week this week was, in a fundamental principle of 7671 states that electrical installations shall be designed by one or more of which type of person? Is it a qualified persons, trained persons, skilled persons, or competent persons? So what does 7671 state that an installation should be designed by? Which one of those people? What's your thoughts on that, Keith?
Well, it used to be that we would talk about competent people, which we don't use that wording anymore. It was replaced in the Third Amendment. So if we talk about how people are trained and they gain the skills through education, training, and practical skills, and one of the things that we need to be is that the person who is skilled in electrical work needs to be able to perceive risks, and that's very important, that they can perceive risk and how to avoid the hazards which electricity can cause, of course.
Yeah, very much so. And if we look at that regulation says that the electrical installation should be designed by one or more skilled persons to provide for the protection of persons and livestock and property in accordance with section 131, and also the proper functioning of the electrical installation and the intended use. And again, if we were to look at the definition, because I think it's really important the way it describes the definition of a skilled person, and 7671 says a skilled person is a person who possesses, as appropriate, the nature of the electrical work to be undertaken, adequate education, training and practical skills, and who is able to perceive risks and avoid hazards. So absolutely what you said about it's you have to have that understanding of the type of installation to be able to determine, well, okay, what are the possible risks in this type of installation? So that's where it clearly says you have to possess knowledge appropriate to the nature of the electrical work, because we spoke about it earlier. Hazardous areas, very different to a typical domestic new build, which in turn is very different to an automated process with lots of moving parts. So you do need to understand the differences of the type of installation that you're working on, and most importantly, be able to recognise and perceive the risks associated with that type of installation.
And well, Sam, the skills that we gain for an apprenticeship or traineeship are only the start of it. It's the skills that we learn on a job that we're changing. i.e., like domestics, people now putting solar panels on roofs and EV charging. It's new skills that we possibly didn't learn as an apprentice or a trainee. So the skill set is always moving on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes it's, we can look and there will be aspects of the job that we'll be familiar with, because they'll be common across different areas, but then there will always be the differences that we need to consider. And so, yeah, sometimes it's difficult because you're being asked. Typical examples is you're being asked to design the fire alarm, you're being asked to design the emergency lighting. Now, there's a lot of BS 7671 involved in the installation of those things, but not in the design. So again, that's something where it's a specialist area. A few people in the chat are talking about competence, and it used to be, didn't it, when back in the days of the 17th edition, the last yellow book we had, it did refer to competent people, but one of the changes that's been made since then is we differentiate between a skilled person, an instructed person, and an ordinary person. So there's no longer a definition for competent people within 7671.
And Sam, in HSR 25, Regulation 16, where it says it must be able to prevent danger or injury, that person needs to be skilled to be able to stop them aspects happening as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, a few questions that were hung over while we get some into the chat. So please, if you're in the audience tonight and you've got a burning question, post it into the chat and we'll try and get round to it. While you're doing that, we'll just look at some of the ones that have hung over from the past. A really common question that we get on the technical helpline is, to comply with 7671, do the metal fixing screws of a plastic light switch need to be earthed for protection against electric shock? What's our thinking here? Do we need to earth those screws independently? So no, it is the simple answer. And in fact, there's a reg. We've highlighted it on the screen there tonight. 410.3.9 that specifically says you can omit the provision of fault protection for the following types of equipment. And in the little list, the third point is exposed conductive parts which, owing to their reduced dimension or their disposition, cannot be gripped or come into significant contact. And the note actually gives us a bit of information. This exemption applies, for examples, to bolts, rivets, nameplates, cable clips, screws and other fixings. So because they're so small, they're not perceived as a risk. Would you add anything to that, Keith?
No, only that's probably why you find that most of the screws are recessed in switches and sockets as well, so they're even more make it even harder to touch them. You really would have to pinpoint your finger into that point. And some manufacturers now, they also put little covers over them for you to put on if you want, not just for aesthetics. It's there so they cannot be touched. Yeah,
absolutely. Another one that we had hanging over was, does a domestic bathroom fan isolator to be used for mechanical maintenance need to be located adjacent to the fan? So this is something that we often get when people are doing typically domestic work, and people don't want the isolator in the bathroom next to the fan. So is it a requirement for compliance with 7671 to have the isolator in the bathroom?
No, it's not.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, you can have it outside. Clearly identify what it does, and in a suitable position. It might need to be turned off in an emergency or to break the power. And if it's not local, it should obviously be lockable.
Yeah, that's the key. So again, we've thrown up some regulations. So the first two, which talk about when do we need isolation, well every item of equipment, every circuit, every installation needs a method of isolation, but as Keith says, it needs to be suitably placed. There's no definition of it needs to be next to the fan in a bathroom. It needs to be suitably placed. So for example, if it's deemed that the fan's up out of the way, and there's no danger of entrapment or entanglement during normal operation, then there'd be no need to have a local one next to that fan. And as Keith rightly said, there's an additional requirement for mechanical maintenance. If we've got it for mechanical maintenance and it's not local, then it needs to be lockable in that off position, so that you can't have somebody doing maintenance on the fan only for somebody to re-energize the isolator, and obviously create danger for the person working on the fan. So if they're not local and it's not readily identifiable what it's for, then it needs to be capable of being locked in the off position so that the person doing the maintenance can actually work safely. Another one that again we get asked an awful lot is, can I add circuits to an existing plastic or combustible consumer unit? So can I add circuits to an existing consumer unit, Keith?
You can, yes. There's a load of little caveats to say you might not be able to, but generally you can, yes. As long as the consumer unit is suitable for the alterations, things like it doesn't have signs of burning would be a good one. That all of the conductors are terminated into terminals with inside the board. No parts of the board are missing. Obviously, you can get the exact parts for that board, and you're not going to put another MCB or overload protection device that is unsuitable for that board in there. And really comes down to a regulation there, Sam. So 132.16. I love this regulation. It says alterations and additions, what you must do. And it's complying with manufacturer's instructions as well. So there's a few bits, but the general answer would be yes, you can. Yeah,
and I just wanted to highlight our colleagues at Electrical Safety First. This is one of the questions that's on their standard frequently asked questions produced by WRAG, W-R-A-G, which is the Wiring Regs Advisory Group, made up of all the key stakeholders in the industry, including ourselves, and they've got a freely available set of questions and answers that you can access from the Electrical Safety First website, and this is one of the questions that appears in there, and it goes through the same situation. So we say yes, you can, providing that the consumer unit's fit for purpose, so in particular provides all the right degrees of barrier and enclosure protection, and then, as Keith says, that all existing conductors are correctly terminated, there's no signs of overheating, and there's no evidence of equipment which is subject to a recall. But if you're not aware of the Electrical Safety First questions and answers, go onto the website electricalsafetyfirst.org, and there's a section in there for professional resources, and you'll find lots of information, 2 sets of frequently asked questions, and really useful stuff. Okay, we'll take a look at some of the questions that are coming into the chat, so thanks for those. Keep them coming in. First one I can see is, are metal clad sockets required on the rear of cupboards in domestic kitchens to provide impact protection? So that's coming from an engineer. The thing I'd say there is that there's nothing in 7671 which specifically says you need metal clad sockets for that type of installation, but there is just the general rule that everything you install should be suitable for the environment in which you install it, or the way that you install it makes it suitable. So I think you've got to consider the possible impact, but on the basis that it's in a cupboard, it's very unlikely, I suppose depending upon what the cupboard's being used for, that it would require impact protection of a metal clad switch. But yeah, it really is down to a sort of an assessment of the conditions that your equipment is likely to be put up to in that environment, and then see if it's required. There's certainly nothing in 716M1 that specifically says you must use metal clad switches in cupboards, but it will be purely based on an assessment of the potential of impact and the potential danger, and then, like you say, you've got to select the equipment to make sure it's appropriate for that environment, or the way that you install it makes it appropriate for that environment. Would you add anything to that, Keith?
No, not really. I totally agree with you. I think the thing that might have come from is that if people are putting up multi-gain units in the back of a cupboard, they normally are metal. So if somebody has seen a metal enclosure for a multi-gain unit, they might be surmising that any other spurs or cooker switches would have to be metal as well. But no, they don't have to be.
Yeah.
Suitable for the environment is where we need to go down.
Yeah, absolutely. AFDDs in high-rise buildings, but what about landlords and communal supplies? Well, the requirement that was introduced in Amendment 2 for AFDDs for protecting socket outlets in high-rise, high-risk residential buildings, that would be throughout. So it's not just actually within the dwellings of those buildings, the residential bit, but it's throughout the whole building. So yeah, it would still apply to landlords and communal areas, the socket outlets that are being supplied by those circuits would require AFDD protection within the high-rise residential building, or the care home, or the purpose-built student accommodation. So all of those 4 installation types. It's not just within the residence, but it's throughout. But it is only a requirement for socket outlet circuits rated up to 32 amp. A few comments about competence and can you be skilled but not competent. Well, this is where it came away from, and so now there's a clear definition of skilled, and then also instructed, because some of the things within 716M1 require or put requirements on if you've got instructed people, and also if you've got ordinary people. So yeah, it does differentiate between what the definition of skilled is, because as I say, the definition of competence was removed back in the 17th edition Amendment 3.
I think that was Sam as well. It was hard to define where competence come from, wasn't it? Whether it was going to be from a skill set or it was just somebody instructing you. So the word competency was taken away because the word skilled defined what somebody was going to be, and that skill was going to be brought in via education and training. Yeah.
Okay. I've got a question that's coming from an engineer. In HMOs, an unsatisfactory code is given for lack of AFDDs to a final socket circuit. Is it an alteration to a socket or change of consumer unit due to other factors? Is it a requirement to include AFDDs to these circuits now? The reg states shall be provided. So it is it's a requirement for new circuits. Because I think the reg talks about AFDDs being required to protect the circuits. So certainly yes, if you were adding a socket outlet circuit to an existing installation within one of the 4 categories which include HMOs, then you would need to provide AFDD protection for that new circuit in order for it to be compliant with 716M1. So yeah, it does include the addition of of socket outlet circuits in those 4 installation types. Got the same question again repeated, but so I think we've answered that with regards domestic kitchens and cupboards. When issuing a certificate, is there a required period of time a contractor must keep a copy of it for? Okay, yeah, good question. It's one of the things which we've had in our scheme rules for a while, but also now is part of the electro technical assessment specification. So it's keeping those records for a minimum of 6 years. That's right, isn't it, Keith? It is a 6-year period.
It is 6 years.
Yeah.
Contractually, it might be more.
Good point. Yeah.
If you was working in a commercial basis, and it's lots of hospitals and hospital trusts want 10 years, but yeah, it's a minimum of 6 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. In that it's a minimum, and do check your contractual requirements, because they may consider it that they want that longer, so that they've got some form of a maintenance planned program that might ask you to do that. So yeah, but we suggest, and that's also part of our scheme requirements, and as I say, part of the EAS document, the electrotechnical assessment specification document, says a minimum of 6 years. So again, I think that's been repeated, but also confirmed by some of the people who are also saying 6 years. So that's really good to see. So we've got in a new build property where another contractor installs the solar, but you run the cable only at a first fix stage and have nothing more to do with the solar. What should be recorded on your NIC EIC test sheet? So if you're running a circuit, then that would be considered a new circuit, which would need to be certified using a full installation certificate. You would then need to specify, what the circuit's for, in order to confirm that you've done things such as selected the correct overcurrent protective device, the correct cable current carrying capacity size. So you would need to record evidence of what your circuit is, although you may not in this case be installing the solar system. You may not be installing the load and the equipment that the circuit's supplying, but you would still need to document that as a new circuit. Can you think of any? I'm just reading that aloud and just wondering what's behind that question. But yeah, in a new build property where another contractor installs the solar, but you run the cable only at a first fix stage and has nothing more to do with the solar, what should be recorded on your NIC test certificate? And I think it's the case of, record it as is. So you've perhaps run a cable to an isolator or some other form of equipment where you're going to be terminating your cable, and just make it clear that that's what, if you know that something's going to be added, then perhaps record that it's going to be added, but make it clear that it's going to be added by others.
Yeah, so if you're just taking a supply up to an isolator before it goes into the inverter, if you've livened it to that point, then it's obviously a live socket, requires further certification. But if you haven't connected it, you could just do some dead tests, couldn't you? And a confirmation that if it's the supply to the inverter, that you've got a volt drop that's no greater than 1% as well, rather than the 3% that we normally do. An inverter's 1%. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think it's the case of, you in this instance, you won't be involved in installing the final equipment that the circuit's designed to supply, but then make it clear, make it clear on your certificate exactly what you have done, so that at a later date you can't be accused of having done something that else, So just make it nice and clear what you have done, what the end of your requirements were, and as the certificate says, you know, the extent of work covered by your certificate. What are you certificating? How far are you going? And in this stage, you can say that it's only to a termination point or an isolator, whatever it is, that you've left your final circuit cables terminated into. Another one that we've been asked, and so I'll just flash this up on the screen, is what's the difference between UO and U on our installation certificates? And so just to give people a rundown, because people do get confused. So U is the nominal voltage between line conductors, and not between line and neutral, or line and earth, or not between live conductors, but specifically between line conductors, LINE. So if you've only got a single phase installation where you only have one line conductor, then you won't have a U. It won't exist. So you could record that as not applicable. UO then is the nominal line voltage to earth, either RMS AC or ripple free DC. So this is something that you will have regardless of whether it's single phase or three phase. And in both of those instances, if we've got standard single phase, standard three phase, then your UO will be 230 volts to earth. So you will only get in, for example, a dual phase or three phase installation, and then the example given in a standard three phase installation, your line voltage U will typically be 400 volts. So that's 400 volts between the different line conductors. So yeah, just bear in mind that you won't always have a U. You will always have a UO. But you won't always have a U. Okay, let's have a look and see what others we've got coming in. When installing equipment in a plant room for a domestic indoor swimming pool, what would the maximum testing frequency be? So if we're looking at a typical arrangement, a recommendation to the next frequency of inspection, basically, so to the next recommended periodic inspection, it's normally down to the type of installation. So for example, if it were domestic, so actually you've said, sorry, I do beg your pardon, you have said it's a domestic indoor swimming pool, then the testing frequency would be in line with the rest of the domestic installation. Although the installation around a swimming pool is seen as a special location because of the enhanced risk associated with electric shock, because we've now got people that are wet and unclothed, so contact will be greater, or potentially greater. The fact that it's seen as a potentially more hazardous type of installation, that's catered for with respect to the additional requirements required in section 702. So that's where it's catered for. The fact that then it falls part of a domestic installation would gauge the frequency generally. So you know it's probably going to be quite well maintained by the owners, and not used by members of the public, but used by the owners of the installation typically. So it would, you know, on a standard installation, we would suggest that you fall in line with the same requirements for the rest of the domestic install. Would you agree with that, Keith? I'm just going to take a look at what our inspection and test guide, if that gave any additionals for a swimming pool.
Just one thing I think about on that: if it was, if you had made the swimming pool area a TT earthing system, and it was originated, for say, from a TNS or TNCS, I might just put a comment on my installation, sir, that the earthing system, the TT earthing system, might want more regular testing, rather than the 10-year period between the day that you started and the next time. I think I would make that as an engineering judgment on the subsoils and other bits and pieces like that.
Yeah, and I've just had a quick look in our inspection, test and certification guide about the recommended initial frequencies of inspection of electrical installations, and there's nothing. It doesn't differentiate a swimming pool as having a more onerous. The things that it does tend to be agricultural and horticultural premises where you've got an outdoor installation and you're exposed to the elements, so that creates the differences. But yeah, not a domestic indoor swimming pool. It doesn't see it as a difference in terms of the recommended frequency of inspection. Okay, let's have a look. So we've got a comment there about yes, unless you can guarantee no DC leakage. So I'm just trying to gather back through the chat and to see where that's coming from. Yeah. So another one that that we talked about was if what should you do if you find that on a TNCS earthing arrangement the ZE is much greater than the typical maximum of 0.35 ohms quoted. Again, a common question, and we get it similarly on a TNS when it's found to be greater than 0.8. So the first thing to say is that those values of 0.35 and 0.8 aren't maximums that the DNO have to comply with. They're given as a typical maximum to enable people, for example, to do design based on the type of earthing arrangement. But the DNO won't necessarily come out if you tell them that it's higher, and they won't make changes to bring it down to that value or below. So it's not a value that they have to meet, it's a value that's given as a typical example, and as I say, it's a value that we use when we do design. If you do find that it's greater, obviously the first thing we would suggest is letting your customer know and tell them to contact their DNO, or alternatively, with their permission, do it on their behalf, so that you can give them the technical reason and rationale behind what you found. It would be good if it's possible to have examples of if you've been to the installation before and you had previous experience where the values were lower. So if you can give the DNO evidence that ZE, the earth fault loop is increasing for whatever reason, then that's always good to let them know that, because it may then cause them concern and they'll come and investigate it sooner. But ultimately you've got to look at does the increase in earth fault loop impedance mean that you're not going to meet your required maximum ZS's and therefore not achieve your disconnection times within the installation itself. So that's why you then might start to think, okay, I've then got to do something. I've either, for example, if you're not using RCDs, you might install RCDs to provide you with the required fault protection. Alternatively, you might think about changing the earthing arrangements, for example, to TT, so that you're then independent of the DNO earthing network. But those are some of the things that you should consider. But just, I guess, in a nutshell, bear in mind the DNO don't have to achieve those values of 0.35 and 0.8. And ultimately we've got to, within the installation, achieve those values that are going to ensure that our protective devices operate. Would you add anything?
If it's unsafe, then the DNO are obliged on the TN earthing system to supply you with a safe earthing system, aren't they? If it's 0.35 and we've got 0.5 or 0.8, they probably won't do anything about it. If it's in the hundreds of ohms, then they will come out because it's going to be unsafe. They might then convert it themselves into a TT system as well, or they might deal with the problem. So unless it's going to be a safety issue, they won't necessarily be obliged to come out. But under the ESQCR regulations, they are obliged to give you a safe earth on a TN earthing system.
No, it's worth saying that's a really good point, because the situation under their rules, the ESQCR, is that if they've provided the installation with an earth in the past, then they have to maintain that earth. So, for example, if you had a TNS or TNCS earthing arrangement, and that was provided for you by the DNO, then they've got to maintain that earthing arrangement. And so, as Keith says, if that deteriorates, then the onus and the responsibility to do something about the earthing arrangement will be down to them. The situations where if they've never provided you with an earth, then they've got no sort of responsibility to do it in the future. So if right from the beginning yours was a TT installation, they don't have to provide you with an earth if your TT installation is failing, and you want to try and improve it by having a TNCS or TNS earthing arrangement. So yeah, it's a good point.
If they convert their overhead system to a TNCS and it then comes into your property, they don't guarantee it then to be 0.35 either. So you could certainly end up with a figure that's higher than that, and they certainly won't do anything about it then. The only other thing you could think about doing is, under our new regulations, put a supplementary earth rod in as well.
Yeah, to bring it down. But you need to be aware of what else that can do and the detrimental effects that might have. One of the engineers has come back that said, "Hi, you mentioned earlier that there's a max 1% volt drop to an inverter. Where is this in BS7671?" It's not in BS7671. So yeah, that's what's. Where does that 1% value come from, Keith?
It's in the solar course.
Yeah.
So it's under the. So it might well be in the special locations for solar photovoltaic units, but it was something you'd learn on the solar course, that the maximum volt drop is 1% for the supply going to an AC inverter. Okay.
All right, we'll do some digging and we'll post something out on that to that engineer, because I wasn't aware that it specified it in 7671, but like you say, it might be in one of the a code of practice or even an MCS requirement, but we'll do some digging on that. Okay, I think we've got quite a quiet night there tonight in terms of questions. So I'll just scroll back through from the beginning. So AFDDs and Amendment 2, is the technology ready? I'm encountering a number of practical issues across various live projects. How can designers specify, knowing that they may be leaving the end user with various issues due to nuisance tripping? I cannot question the logical for the regulations. However, is the technology and associated training ready? It's a fair comment, and I think it's the same with any new protective device, that there may be some certainly training from the manufacturers is available. BEMA do a very good guide. But yeah, I think we wouldn't offer any specific training associated with AFDDs, but I'm sure that the product manufacturers will. So it might be a case of making contact with your preferred manufacturer, or as I say, certainly download the Beamer guide, which is a free technical bulletin that they've produced about AFDDs and the operation of them. We are aware of them, that being installed more and more now. So they're certainly out there, and enhancements being made all the time. I saw recently some information about a unit that was combined, for example, so it not only did it have AFDD functionality but also RCD functionality and MCB functionality in one unit, and obviously now when that trips, it's useful to know what's caused it to trip. Is it the MCB side or the RCD portion or the AFDD? And this device actually had a QR code which you could read, and it would indicate to you what actually had caused the device to trip. So yeah, there's continual development of those products and further enhancements, I'm sure, coming. But yeah, I would suggest making a direct contact with your preferred product manufacturer, and see what they'll do in terms of training. Have you been exposed to AFDDs yet?
I've seen a few guys fitting them. Most of them have been single module devices. Commercially, I've seen a couple of manufacturers where they sit outside the board, so the overload additional protection device is in the board, and then in the separate enclosures the AFDD. But no, most of the ones that I'm seeing are from one of the most popular manufacturers, and they just seem to be single devices. And most people, I think, are aware that it's probably best to be fitting them on new circuits only, not just doing a whole ball change and putting them in. Otherwise, you might be getting some nuisance tripping.
Yeah. Another couple. Any thoughts on the Open device standard, which has just been released? It's something worthy of note. So the IET have just published a document for public comment on an Open standard. So this is to do with open pen conductors on a particular an EV supply. So yeah, if you're not aware of that at the moment, as I say, that's only in the last week been published by the IET. We are looking at it ourselves, and we'll put forward back our comments. But as I say, it is a document open for public comment, so people can read it and put forward their own comments. Very much so. And one question right at the end there: how are AFDDs to be tested and verified to be operational? There's no I'm not aware of any test equipment that's designed. The product standard does cater for either a manual test or a constant systematic check, so that these things are basically self-checking periodically and giving a visual indicator of whether they're functioning or not. So yeah, there's no external test equipment that I'm aware of that's used, and it's not a requirement to test them as a product for functionality for compliance with 7671.
Most of them have an indicator on them, an LED indicator to say their status, and the functional test button would just disconnect it as would an RCD test button. So I don't necessarily think that that's testing the AFDD. I haven't really looked into that.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to tell you a few other things. We're up on the 45-minute mark, so just to let you know that we do still have a couple of wire webinars before we break for the end of year. So coming up this Wednesday, actually, we have a technical quiz which we're repeating again this year. Very popular last year. So if you're interested in that, bit of fun but also a bit of learning, we do go through the answers on the night please go to the website and register for that. And then a week on Wednesday, we've got our final wire webinar of the series, associated with mental health and well-being, and that's entitled Thriving Through the Festive Break. So yeah, if you want to go and register for either of those, you can go onto the website and register for those. Register for them both all in one go, and be ready. We've just recently put some enhancements into our pocket guides. We've now got some additional pocket guides, and also include the gas pocket guides within the same free app. So if you haven't already downloaded our free app, please do so. It's really good. Contains all the pocket guides, contains some very useful electric calculators as well, which people are getting. We're getting some really good feedback on useful they are. Includes the adiabatic equation, includes the maximum ZS's for all the common protective devices, and some other tools that are useful both on installation verification and also on periodic inspection as well. Hopefully everybody's seen our consumer campaign, where we're doing our best to make people aware that they should be employing electrical skilled people to do work around their properties rather than trying to do it themselves. So please do promote that. If you do have a website, we'd be more than happy for you to run that. Don't DIY video on yours. Please do keep in touch. We've got some things that are coming up early part of next year, so please do keep an eye out across all the different social media. This will be our last Monday night Q&A for this year, but we'll be back next year with these similar events as well. First working Monday of every month, and those are freely open sessions, so you can ask us any questions and we'll do our best to respond to you. Any final thoughts, Keith? Again, it's always the fastest 45 minutes of my month, these sessions. Any final thoughts from yourself?
No, just like to wish the opportunity to wish everybody a nice break over the festive period, and stay safe, everybody, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I do hope you do get a break, and yeah, I do hope you get a little bit of what you need, and perhaps a little bit extra as well. So yeah, please do, and like I say, keep an eye out, because we'll start to launch next year's series of the wire, and again, we're still looking for subjects that people would like to cover, and always willing to make some changes. Thanks very much. I hope we've answered your questions. If you post it into the chat, I apologise if we missed your question, but what we'll do is we'll sweep that up and use that next time we start, which will be in January 2024. Sounds crazy, but yeah, it's not too far away now. Okay, thank you very much for your time.